Today we're going to tear down an old Sony HVC 2200 color video camera that is 1981 vintage. This one is beyond repair, so I'm not even going to try to fix it. You'll see as soon as I get it apart what's wrong with it. We're going to tear it down and take it, examine it, and see what makes this thing tick. An old friend dropped this off. He was getting rid of it, so he said, "Here, take this and tear it down." Of course, this is an old Sony Trinicon video camera. This one is an HVC 2200. This is from the two-piece recorder and camera days. To power this thing up, I have to either plug it into a portable recorder or plug it into one of the Sony power supplies, which I so happen to have. I'll plug it in and see if this thing actually develops a picture. So turn on the power. Take the lens cap off, and we'll see whether this thing actually produces a picture. Now, as I say, I'm not expecting anything out of this camera because this thing is so bloody old. So 1981, March of 1981 was when this camera was produced. As you can see, all we're getting is some lines across the picture, so we're going to have to take this thing apart. So I think my math is about as good as yours. 37 years old. And that does nothing to it. But we have no picture. I don't even know if the iris is open on the lens. It might be that the iris is stuck. Anyway, it's one worth tearing down to take a look inside this thing. I like this. It's telling me not to remove the screws. Well, I always learn to not heed what the warnings were on the back. High voltage. Who cares about high voltage? Got a little viewfinder, it's working. The little TV's working on here. Showing a blank screen. If nothing else, I can keep the lens cap as a place to put screws. You know, so I won't lose them. Say there's a good chance that this thing's going to end up where it was going to end up before it was dropped off at my door, and that's in the recycling center. But we'll just pop it apart and see if there's anything obvious that's not working on this thing. Now you got to be careful when you're working on these tube cameras because they do have a little bit of high voltage in them to operate the Vidicon tube. Sony call it a trinicon, but it's still just a Vidicon tube. Okay, that's mistake number one because this is the trinicon tube, which, well, you'll see. When we take the tube out, you'll see it is completely different than a conventional Vidicon. So I think we see the problem on this thing. Take a look down in the back of this. This is the tube. Okay? And watch what happens when I fire this thing up. We have a bad tube. It's arcing internally, giving off a nice pretty blue glow. There you see, it's still glowing. That tube is gassy. That's the problem with this camera. Is that the Vidicon tube is shot. As I say, these have fairly high voltage in them, several hundred volts. It's not as much as a CRT has, but they still have several hundred volts that goes to the tube, to the target, and so forth. So that's the problem with this one. We have a bad Vidicon. We can take the tube out if you want to see it. typically what's probably happened on this thing over the years, just sitting around, you know, what's more than likely happened is the... So I'll explain how this works by comparison to, say, other color tubes, because other color tubes use just a single tube. We're talking a single tube camera, not a 3-tuber, but a single tube. But how they worked was they... how this works by comparison. Kill my sound here so I don't hear myself, because there's such a huge delay. How regular color tubes worked was they used a 2-color filter over the front of the tube, typically like a magenta and a green, and then a clear filter on the lens, or on the tube itself. And as the beam passed over, it would detect color going through the magenta or yellow filter, or whatever they used, and the green filter, and then the white, and it would use mathematics to determine the 3 colors, red, green, and blue, based on 2 colors that were used, subtractive colors, with white as a reference. And every other manufacturer that made single tube cameras did that. What Sony did, this tube I'm holding here that you see, this is a conventional color single tube. You can see the color filter on the front compared to the tube on the left, which is a monochrome tube. You can see the difference in the target. Now, what Sony did, and when I get the tube out of here, you'll see it. It actually has a wire attached to it. They actually had a grid embedded in the tube, and Sony used a red, green, and blue filter, RGB filter, and an electrode that was internal to the tube, so that as the beam swept over, when it hit this internal electrode, it would produce a pulse, and that pulse was used for the timing circuit for timing the red, green, and blue. So the trinicon tube gave color fidelity that was very close to a 3-tube camera, because they weren't separating the colors optically and figuring out what color was which. It was a hard-coded switch between the red, green, and blue. And the Satacon version used in cameras like the HVC 2800, which I have one of, and the broadcast cameras, the single tube broadcast cameras, give them enough light and they would look almost as good as a 3-tube camera. It really was a cool technology. Very similar to what a beam index tube, how that works on the single gun color, where Sony used an ultraviolet stripe on the back side of the tube, which was picked up by a detector that looked into the bell of the tube. I'll return you to the live audio. And then what they do is that signal that comes out, they time it and they chop it up and switch between red, green, blue, kind of like an Indexatron CRT, which only has one beam. And it works along the same principle as an Indexatron tube. This area over here on the left, this is a grid area which produces a frequency which is used to gen lock or to synchronize the phase lock loop that switches once we get into the color area of the tube. Now, changing camera pickup tubes is something that I've never done. And the reason that I've never done it is because you need specialized equipment to set that timing generator for the 3 colors on a single tube camera. So it was something that when I, throughout my entire career in electronics, I never changed a camera tube on a color camera. I changed black and white camera tubes all the time for closed circuit cameras, but I never got into changing a color tube. But for entertainment tonight, on this video, I'm going to take this camera tube out and see whether it is the same tube as that other tube that I've got. And if it is, I'll try putting that other tube in and see how much of a mess I can make. Okay, got that removed. Don't know what I got to take out next. I have no idea how to do this. I've never taken one of these apart, right? So it's highly possible that this camera won't be going bad together. It'll be just heading into the scrap heap when I'm done. A very good possibility. In fact, I may even swing my hammer. I might swing my hammer. Or give it the death wand. Okay, what am I doing now? I have no idea. But there's a spring attached here somewhere. I think this plays with the filter on the lens. Uh-oh, we're in trouble now. There. See, there's a spring on this thing, but I have a feeling that that spring is, it's the to release the filter that's pushed by a lever on the back here. So we'll just remove that spring. Okay, that is the tube here. Now, it's probably not the same tube, but we'll take this one out just to see what it is. Also because I've never taken apart one of these Sony tube cameras before. At least not down to the tube. I have a 2800 sitting over on the shelf there actually. That still actually works. At least it did last time I turned it on. It might not work anymore. You know how electronics are when they sit around. Sometimes they just kind of go foobar. Okay, that's the yoke assembly, but what is holding this in place? Might be these screws here into the back of the lens. Now, will this come out? Okay, the socket comes off the back of the tube.
Standby supply. And of course, if the standby supply is not working, the main supply is not going to work either.
I think there's a clamp here that's got to come off too. I think this clamp has to come off.
What one for it looks like.
And there's another piece down here. Now, will this tube come out now? That bracket will come off. Okay, now the tube should pull out of the, there we go. There's how the tube comes out, right like that. Sort of. What else am I missing? I have a feeling that there's another wire that's connected to this thing for the target that's connected maybe to the preamp on the other side. So I think I got to take the other side panel off here. I'm pretty sure the target is connected directly into the preamp, which is going to be on this side of the camera. Also, that other tube that I just showed you guys, that came out of a Toshiba camera that was also thrashed. From the same owner, by the way. The same guy that gave me that Toshiba camera gave me this. And he gave me an SL2000 as well, which I haven't looked at. I've worked on my own SL2000, but I haven't worked on the second one that I was given. Okay, let's get it come off here now. Viewfinder, come out of here. bracket might actually be useful for attaching my camera to the tripod it's on. Let's take a quick connect. See, the work required to change a pickup tube, even back in the days when these were still being used, was so much that, you know, people wouldn't change the tube. If their camera had a foobar tube because they did something stupid like pointed at the sun, they threw the camera out even back then when these were $2,000+ because that pickup tube itself was probably, you know, it was probably $1,100 or $1,200 for the tube. I mean, they were not cheap, and then you had all the labor to change it. So typically, if the tube was shot on a camera, the camera was never repaired. Okay, where am I getting into this preamp? This is it here. It's gonna have a cover on it, I think. I don't know if it comes off. It should pop off. There we go. There's the preamp cover. It's soldered down up the top here. Where's the tube connected? Looking for the front of that tube. It's right down in here. And I can see it. Yeah, there's a wire down here. Looks like it's soldered onto this preamp. Well, I broke the wire. Here's the tube here. Look at it. Look at how cloudy it is. This thing looks like it's had water in it. Which wouldn't be surprised because this guy has a boat. He used to take it out on his boat all the time. That's probably why the thing's shot. It's got water into it. You can see the cloudiness on the front of this tube here. But it's a different tube, so it's not like I'm going to be able to change it here if I push the tube through. It's coming right out of the yoke. Interesting. See, Sony mixed field trinicon. Unplug that plug. Unplug this plug. Take the entire tube out here. See if I can pull it through. We'll just cut them off. There, now it'll come apart. There we go. So that's the focus coil and the yoke. And the tube itself is actually inside here, and it's all sealed and aligned. But you can see how bad that is. Take a look at this. Look at the target on this thing. Now again, to change the tube, you don't have to take it all out like this, as I'll figure out when I figure out how to get the tube out. It's held in place from the front. If I had pulled the lens off the camera, I would have been able to unscrew the cap, the bracket that holds it in place, and push the tube through from the back. But I don't have a manual for this. But hey, now I know how to take it apart for the next one. This should come out. This front piece should come out here. This might unscrew. There, that's how it comes out. This front piece unscrews. Okay, there's the filter. You can see all the salt on there. And then there's going to be the mixed field filter in front of that. And there's the tube. Wow! Isn't that a cool looking tube? I'm going to hang on to this just for my collection of old tubes. Look at the inside of that tube. That's incredible. There's the target with its color filter. This is the readout here. This wire here. This is the target wire, which is actually attached, soldered right to the ring here of the tube. And this here, I have a feeling this is a backlight, that they flood the surface of the tube with a light. They call it a light, a bias light. Pretty sure that that's what this is, although I'm not 100% because, as I say, I've never worked on one of these cameras before. But these wires go into this piece that's glued on the front, which looks to be the color filter. Wow. But just look at the intricate work here on the inside of the tube. That's incredible. You know, so this is a Sony's trinicon, as they called it, and as you can see, it's a heck of a lot different than a Vidicon tube, than a color Vidicon tube, or a black and white Vidicon tube. This is really something quite unique. And say this tube was shot because, well, when I put power to it, we had gas in the tube. It's gone leaky and it's shot. So anyway, this thing wasn't going to go back together anyway, and I just wanted to show you guys what's inside it. So this is going to be now sent off to recycling, but I am going to keep this because I think that this is kind of cool just to look at it. You know, it's kind of a neat looking tube. So I'll hang on to the old trinicon tube out of here, and the rest of the stuff is going to go in the scrap heap because there's really nothing in here that is of any use to me or to anybody. Even the lens is not really any use, right? So anyway, that's that one. And thanks for watching. Maybe I'll keep some of these high voltage capacitors. Probably I'll keep these high voltage caps in here because it's got, 630 volt caps. These will come in handy when I'm doing a tube radio, so I'll do that. I'll pull the high voltage caps out of here. I can reuse them. They're never going to go bad, right? So I'm going to pull those out and then scrap the rest of it. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you again real soon.